Welcome to the community classroom and our discussion on applying reparations law to the saga of Jacob and Esau. So we're going to be looking at reparations law. We've looked at this before. We're going to apply it to the Jacob and Esau situation. So we're going to be looking at the law of remedies. We're going to be looking at some equitable issues. And since we are in a time of judgment, this seems like an appropriate time to address this issue. So that means we're also going to indirectly touch on Leviticus and Deuteronomy as we delve into Genesis. Now we're going to look at the story of Jacob and Esau so that this all makes sense. Those of you who were along for the journey as we addressed reparations for ADOS, this will make perfect sense as a recap, and you will be able to extrapolate very readily to this situation. As a matter of fact, when you look at reparations law, it's really sort of common sense law. And with respect to this situation surrounding the Jacob and Esau narrative, it will also make sense as sort of a common sense response to what has taken place. And so it's not going to be something that's so esoteric that seems out of reach in terms of comprehending what has gone on. Before we jump into this, however, it's important to remember this, and many people don't know this, but American law basically is an outgrowth of what's understood as church law, what's understood as Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And so therefore, what we're going to discuss is a natural outgrowth of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. So for those who say that doesn't apply to the Bible, these legal premises come directly from the Bible. So yes, indeed, they do relate to the Bible. So let's get started. Now, before we get into this whole dynamic of Jacob and Esau, we're just going to touch on a few psychological themes that are underlying some of these dynamics in this particular family. So Abraham's children, grandchildren, there are some dynamics that are going on in this family. And so some of the things you'll note if you reflect on the narrative is you'll see a theme of arrogance. You will see a theme of envy. You will see a theme of dependency and immaturity. And so with respect to Jacob and Esau, in one narrative at least, you have these two men being completely adult men. However, the relationships that are described with the parents have an element of enmeshment. There is an element of extreme dependency that is developmentally perhaps inappropriate, even if you look at biblical times. And so you see quite a bit of immaturity in the behaviors, the reactions to things, just the basic way of handling life situations in this saga that we are going to discuss. And before we go on, I want to clarify about the term envy. Psychologically, envy is very much related to jealousy, but it is jealousy with the desire to destroy. So it's jealousy coupled with the desire to destroy. And so it's the individual who sees something that is in the possession of another, or something that another is, and that jealous person not being in possession of this thing or this trait, they want the other thing, but they also seek to destroy it for the other person. So they may seek to destroy the person, or they may seek to destroy whatever the thing is. And so that is basically the crux of envy. And so now we're going to leap back into the law from our psychology discussion there. And so with a constructive trust, which is what we're going to talk about here with respect to Jacob and Esau and envy, a constructive trust is not technically a trust where you have a trustee and then you have the property and that property is transferred and you have a beneficiary. It's not that type of trust. And so sometimes it's thought of as a legal fiction. So it's called a trust, but it doesn't fit the typical criteria of a trust. A constructive trust is known as a remedy. So it is a legal remedy. And it is a remedy for what is known legally as unjust enrichment. It means being enriched, being enhanced unjustly. It's not right, it's not fair, it doesn't legitimately belong to the person. And so you can think of unjust enrichment when you have settlers or colonizers or imperialists that go around the world taking stuff or finding things that do not belong to them and then appropriating them and then claiming them for themselves. That is an unjust enrichment. Living in homes that one did not build. There's a reference to that in scripture also. So this idea of possessing something that you did not create. And so what you have with a constructive trust is you have this remedy. It is to prevent unjust enrichment. And so with the constructive trust, that stolen property, that appropriated property, the trust orders that the person who would be otherwise unjustly enriched, that person who takes something that doesn't belong to them, they are ordered to transfer it right back to the party for whom this thing was intended. And so it wasn't intended for the person who's in possession of it. And so even though they've been holding on to it or they are in receipt of it, because it does not legitimately belong to them, they are just simply holding on to it, sort of like safekeeping, stewardship for the other person, the intended party. And this is what you actually see with this narrative with Jacob and Esau. Now you have two events that take place. And sometimes people get these events confused. They will conflate them. And part of this conflation is there's an attempt to justify what took place with Jacob and Esau. And so there is almost a blaming the victim. And so you have these two events and you have two outcomes. And so again, there's a conflation about these two events in order to obscure the totality of these circumstances. Now, for this constructive trust, we are going to focus on what was known as the blessing, not the birthright, but the blessing. So the gifting. Now we're going to read from this particular version. There will be some paraphrasing. So this will be our version. Since there are so many versions, we're going to make this simple because we are looking at the constructs that are going on here. And so in this particular passage from Genesis, you have Rebekah, which is the mother of Jacob and Esau, saying to Jacob that she overheard the father tell Esau to bring him some venison, that he was to make him this food that he liked so much, and then he was going to bless Esau. And so, as you know, according to the narrative, Esau came out first. And so even though they were twins, Esau is considered the firstborn. You have these patrilineal descent dynamics going on. You have these inheritance processes where the firstborn is the main recipient. This is not consistent across time in terms of scripture, but in terms of this particular situation, that is the paradigm. So he tells him to go and get him this food and bring it back so that he can bless him. The mother, however, tells the other son that she overheard this, and then she tells him to go and get some meat, basically, so that she can cook it, and then he can present this dish to the father while pretending that he is the brother. And so there's an important piece in here that people do not generally talk about, and it is the role of this mother who comes up with this bright idea. And this somewhat passive, dependent, immature mama's boy son known as Jacob. And so he goes along with this. He kicks up a little fuss at first. However, she convinces him that he needs to basically obey what she is saying. And so she says, "Obey my voice, according to that which I command thee. Go now to the flock and fetch me from thence 2 good kids of the goats, and I will make them savory meat for thy father, such as that he loveth." And then she's telling him how he's going to do this deception, do this identity theft, so that he can, in fact, steal the blessing from this father who, according to the narrative, can no longer see clearly. So then Jacob says to the mother that he and Esau do not look alike. And he indicates that Esau is a hairy man and he is a smooth man. This is also interesting because you hear individuals in current times with these narratives about Jacob and Esau, and there's an assertion that Jacob is hairy, lots of hair, beard, all of that. However, in this particular narrative, according to the ancestor Jacob, Jacob is smooth and Esau is hairy. And Esau is hairy in a particular way. He's hairy like goat hair, hairy. And so he says that Jacob says that if he does this thing, that the father is going to feel him and he is going to know that he is not Esau. And in this narrative, it's important to remember that Esau is the father's favorite and Jacob is the mother's favorite. You have a problem right there. And so you have these 2 parents with these favorite adult sons, picking and choosing how they are going to deal with them. So you have a mother who is not only deceiving the father, but she is working to disinherit her firstborn child. So you've got a lot of pathology going on here, right here in this narrative that people don't generally want to talk about. Okay, so she also tells little Jacob, grown Jacob, that he doesn't have to worry. He just needs to obey, and that whatever curse it is that he is concerned about that will befall him, that she will receive the curse. The curse will be upon her. So she removes this whole dynamic of him taking any responsibility for what has taken place. And she instead says she will take the responsibility. The curse will be upon her. It's unclear why she was so obsessed with Jacob deceiving the father and also stealing this blessing from Esau. However, this is the dynamic that was going on. And so you also note that she, for some strange reason, had Esau's garments at her house. And so she helped Jacob to disguise himself by putting on these clothes that would be similar to what the father would be expecting from Esau. And so you see, she put the skins of the kids of the goats upon Jacob's hands, upon the smooth of his neck, and then she gave him this meal to give to the father. And then he took it to his father. And he said to his father, according to this narrative, "I am Esau, thy firstborn. I have done according to what you've told me to do. And now here is the venison. So bless me." And so we have that last part up at the top just so that you can see that again. And then Isaac said to him, "How is it that you did this so quickly?" And because Esau was supposed to be going out with his bow and arrow, basically, to go and get this meat and then bring it and then cook it, prepare it and then cook it. And so Isaac is wondering, how did this happen so quickly? And so Jacob then basically says that the Lord helped him. And so he's got quite a story going on here, based upon, who he is and how he was able to acquire this so quickly. And so Isaac is suspicious of this whole situation. But what's important to remember here is that Jacob is asserting that he is someone else, and then he puts on this outfit to pretend that he is someone else. This is like someone stealing someone else's ID. hmm And then going with a check that they wrote, to themselves from this other person that they are pretending to be. And then they go and cash this check that really belongs to someone else. And so you've got this identity theft issue, just it's blatant. You've got this identity theft issue and then this receipt of what would be stolen goods. And so you have several dynamics going on here. And when you're talking about this inheritance issue, it also goes into the issue of wills and trust sorts of dynamics. And so that's what we're going to go into here. So the father goes through all of these things of feeling him and smelling him, but he points out to him, your voice is Jacob's voice. However, everything else seems like Esau. And so then the father goes on to bless Esau. Sit with that for a second. He does not bless Jacob. He does not intend to bless Jacob according to the narrative. Now, there have been people who have said the father really knew and he was pretending not to know, and all of that doesn't matter. It's as if the father did a will, and on the will, the name Esau was on the will. Jacob's name is not on the will. Esau's name is on the will. And so here you have the first problem. And so Jacob cannot just go and take the property that is in Esau's name. These things that were given in the blessing were given to Esau. They are in Esau's name. They are not in Jacob's name. Now, some people who identify as being a descendant of Jacob will argue that that is not the case. However, it is the case. And so that is something that needs to be addressed when analyzing this entire situation. And again, you can't just step outside of this and say that's just natural law, because this natural law is a complete outgrowth of, as I've indicated before, Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And so this is one of those things that that takes place in terms of the period of judgment and the returning of things that do not belong to you. It's not completely necessary to do that, however, because if looking at history, the way that history appears to be presenting itself, Esau has gone over and above what would be reasonable in terms of vindicating what would be considered this wrong. And so you have quite a bit going on in terms of this Jacob and Esau narrative down through history. If these people are who they say they are, who they are suspected of being, Esau has gone far and beyond in terms of what would be reasonable. And so if that is what we are dealing with today with the current situation and some other related situations, this has already been resolved. So there's nothing more to be resolved with respect to this situation. So the property has been returned and then some. So let's go on here. And this is just going on with Isaac talking to Jacob, trying to prove who this happens to be. And so the father says, bring the food to him and then he will bless him. And then he goes on to bless him. Now let's talk about this blessing. There's another dynamic that goes on with people that is notable. And it is where people, in an act of ancestor worship, attribute to the ancestor the power of what would be considered the creator or God. And so when the ancestor blesses or curses someone, people elevate that blessing or that curse to God, the creator, making the blessing or the curse. You see this with Noah. You see this with Abraham, with Jacob. So you see this across the board. These are people. These are created beings. So if these narratives are what these narratives appear to be, these are created beings. And being a created being means that these individuals are not God. Jacob is not God. Abraham is not God. Noah is not God. These are not the creator. And so there are these blessings, but these blessings are like inheritances. So this is what is being passed down. They are not passing down the power of God. These people are not the creator. And you have people talking about what happened with these ancestors as if, in many instances, it was God or the creator directly doing these things. But it was in fact their ancestors speaking, or who they think their ancestors were. And so, of course, this is where it gets really good. So Isaac says to Esau / Jacob, let people serve thee, and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren, and let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. Cursed be every one that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee. Now, people have used this particular passage for all manner of purposes. This again is Isaac talking. You see in 28, so this is 27, 28, you see Isaac saying, therefore God give thee the dew of heaven. Again, Isaac is not God. Isaac is not the creator. He is asking for these blessings. It's as if you bless your child or you pray over your child. Simply because you pray over your child that your child will have all of these wonderful things, and whoever blesses your child shall be blessed, and whoever curses your child shall be cursed. It does not therefore indicate that every single person is subject to the blessing that you have given to your child. However, you have individuals who understand themselves as the descendants of Jacob, believing that this is the actual case. And then you have descendants of Esau, people who believe they are the descendants of Esau, believing that this particular blessing belongs to them. And so therefore they believe they should be able to go all around the earth, making people bow down to them. These two sons, if you were looking at them, just in a typical situation, these two sons appear to be children who are misbehaving. They are behaving badly. And the parents are watching them behave badly. And the parents do nothing. And in fact, when someone says something about the children behaving badly, the person who mentions that the children are behaving badly becomes then demonized while the children are still allowed to behave badly. And because no one says anything about the children behaving badly to the children see that as a license to continue on with the foolishness. And you actually hear this from the individuals who are currently identifying as Jacob and Esau. You even have individuals who identify themselves as Jacob and Esau, structuring things around the world so that when they behave badly, you will not be allowed to even mention that they are behaving badly. That includes when they victimize other people, when they destroy other people's things, when they take other people's things, when they manipulate other people in order to bow down to them. When that takes place, people are punished for even mentioning the fact that these two children are misbehaving. And that is a problem. There are even, there are policies in place to not say anything about these children behaving badly. And most of it is couched in religious terms. Some of it is couched in ethnic terms, but a great deal of it is couched in religious terms. And so there are certain groups that you are not supposed to talk about in terms of bad behavior. In some parts of history, you have it related to the Catholic Church. In some parts of history, you have it related to the Moriscos and the Marranos. And why do you have to continue referring to them as Moriscos and Marranos? Because those two children have structured it so that if you say anything about their bad behavior, then the problem becomes saying something about the bad behavior versus the bad behavior. So carrying on here. So you have Isaac doing this blessing of Esau / Jacob, and Jacob actually receiving it. But here's the catch. Because this was not intended for Jacob, Jacob was simply receiving this on behalf of Esau. Now let's look at what happened with little Esau when he returned. Okay, now moving right along. So Esau makes his father this food, brings it to his father and says, I brought you the food, basically. Rise up and bless me. Isaac says, who is this? Esau, of course, says, I'm Esau, the firstborn son, your firstborn, the one that you are going to bless. Isaac has a physical response of trembling, indicating that he is quite upset. He asks, who brought me the food if it was not you? Now, at this point, of course, Isaac does know or should know. That's where you get into constructive things too. He has constructive knowledge of who this might have been. He suspected that it was Jacob. He said, you sound like Jacob. Smell like Esau, feel like Esau. However, you sound like Jacob. And this goes back to parents know their children. Okay, so then when Esau hears this, he does what is known as throwing a fit, a complete fit. And he insists on the father blessing him also. However, the father indicates to him that he has already given this blessing. He's given the inheritance over to little Jacob. And we don't even have to go any further in the story. If you want to go deeper into the story, you can. But basically, it ends with, or goes into this narrative of Esau indicating that he is going to vindicate this situation and that he is going to rectify this with respect to Jacob. And then the mother sends Jacob off to get married to his cousin so that he can avoid this restitution dynamic that Esau has planned. So let's get back to constructive trust. So what you have here is this. The father essentially wrote a will for Esau to inherit all of these things. And what took place was Jacob came in and pretended to be Esau. And so he received the blessing, the property. And in this particular event, he is simply holding whatever these tangible things are in trust. Now, it's difficult to ascertain how he is holding some of the other blessings in trust or how he was holding them in trust. But indeed, these blessings, these particular blessings, did not belong to Jacob. There may be some other blessings that belong to Jacob, but these things that would have been in a will, so to speak, do not belong to Jacob. And you see here the remedy for this unjust enrichment is this constructive trust. And so theoretically, if this were to be resolved legally, at some point in time, everything that Jacob acquired and even the interest thereof would be transferred over to Esau or Esau's descendants, because that would naturally be their actual inheritance. However, you have some script flipping that is pretty deep and pervasive. And so at this point in time, it is very difficult to disentangle the identities of these Jacob and Esau descendants. And they are very much the wheat and tares that you've read about. It's very difficult to ascertain who's a wheat and who's a tare, because they apparently look very similar, walk alike, talk alike, put on goat skins alike. And you have some situations going on where it appears that there is quite a bit done in the name of Jacob that is done by based upon the names that are being used. Now, of course, these people could just be using these names, but these names appear to be the names associated with, as we've talked about this before, looks like names associated with Esau. So Esau is pretending to be Jacob and doing things in Jacob's name. It's difficult to ascertain the extent to which a Jacob still actually exists on this earth. You also have what looks like Iapetus doing things in the name of Jacob. There's also some indication that Esau could also be pretending to be Iapetus. Okay, so you also have some dynamics where Iapetus looks like Iapetus descendants and Esau descendants have gone into a confederacy of sorts to make this retribution go on for forever and ever. And there are all sorts of odd dynamics that appear to be attached to this. You also have some individuals, and this has to do with that separation, appears to be that separation of the children of Jacob. And so you have a collective of them that are considered the northern kingdom, and then you have that collective understood as Judah, that southern kingdom. You also have a dynamic that looks like those who are in the quote unquote northern kingdom also being in this confederacy with Iapetus, with Esau, and some other people. So this is a very odd dynamic in terms of history. And then you look at it in current times and you see that something apparently is going on. And it is far and beyond simply getting restitution for an inheritance. And so it's where you see people take things a little too far. And so things have been taken a little too far. And then you have all of what appears to be a lot of collateral damage and a lot of game playing, a lot of making things very esoteric. So this is all a part of some sort of game that these people are apparently playing, that they've, sort of looped in with this biblical narrative. It's also unclear if the biblical narrative is actually even attached to these people, or if these people are simply behaving badly and using the biblical narrative as the justification for the behaving badly. And what would probably help people with getting some clarification is if they would step outside of themselves for 5 minutes and actually look at the situation as an onlooker, not as a participant, and look at the situation objectively. The narrative of Jacob and Esau, looking at that objectively, looking at those family dynamics objectively, and then also looking at the dynamics of current times and asking oneself, does this actually make sense? Does this make real, legitimate sense? Is this a right way of handling things? The way that things have taken place over time, was that a constructive way of handling things? So the going around and enslaving the entire planet, taking the resources from the people around the entire planet, was that an okay thing to do? Holding on to those things and refusing to let those things go, is that the right thing to do? Is then pretending to be victimized and the victim, is that the right thing to do? And so those who are descendants of those Moriscos and Moranos, this is a particular question that those individuals definitely need to be asking themselves. And so instead, what you have is a justification for the behavior and a digging in of the heels and insisting that things that don't belong to them belong to them. And this is based upon ethnic cleansing campaigns where they have inserted themselves into these different ethnic groups around the world. And so therefore changing the makeup, the biological makeup of the people around the world. So again, this is food for thought. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.